welcome back to the final hour of the afternoon drive on Wednesday at the NMRA X Gateway X convention. We've had three outstanding clinics so far this afternoon, and we have another what promises to be an outstanding clinic on the way leading into the roundtable discussion at 5 Eastern Daylight Time. Our presenter this time is Gordy Robinson, and you may recognize him because this is the guy who's brought you NMRAX and got it all figured out. So thanks to all his hard work and the others, Martin and Brad and Kramer around the world for putting this together and making it possible. Uh, I'm going to introduce Gordy by asking him to tell a very interesting story. And this is what he found out yesterday. And this is all because of NMRA X Gateway X convention. So, Gordy, if you want to tell us that story and then lead into your presentation.
I would have been more prepared if you'd warned me. I would have had the photograph. But yeah, I got an email yesterday from Terry, who's a chap who lives in Orkney, who's been watching the show. Turns out he lives 100 meters from my house. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And yesterday, just before I went live, I ran down, grabbed a quick selfie, socially distanced with Terry, who used to be an NMRA member, who I'm sure now will become an NMRA member. And Terry got his photograph, and we did share that at one point yesterday afternoon as well. So hopefully Terry's watching this in his house in the village of Bury, on the island of Bury in Orkney, just a few meters away from actually my front door, which is pretty cool. Thanks for your introduction, Bruce. So I'll just get this thing sharing here, and then hopefully you'll be all good. So my clinic is about track planning from track charts. We'll go through a few different things here tonight, and we'll cover that off in a slide in a little while. But before we get into this, a little bit about me. If you're not already familiar, we do talk a lot about where does Gordy come from and what does Gordy do. But we talk more about NMRAX than we do about Gordy's modelling. So I live in Orkney. It's a group of islands off the very north coast of Scotland. Go to the top of the mainland UK and keep going, and you'll find us. I volunteer a lot with the National NMRA on both the social media team and helping out with some of the marketing with Christina, the marketing consultant, and also within the British region, where I am the division rep for Scotland, which is the equivalent of being a division super in the rest of the world, and also the media and events coordinator for the region. So I organise various events for the region, such as a convention where a local division doesn't want to take it on. My primary scale, and I have to keep telling myself this, my primary scale is N scale. There will be no purchasing of things in other scales for at least the whole of 2020. That is my mission. And I already failed because Kaylee sold me some HO scale hoppers at Springfield in January. But since Springfield, I have not bought anything that isn't N scale. So I'm doing pretty well. It's got to be 6 months nearly now. So we'll keep going for that. No matter what scale I model, unless it's Mayo scale stuff, I suppose kind of just broke that whole thing there. I model railroads exclusively in southeastern Wisconsin. I currently hold 4 AP certificates. I'm working towards 3 others, and that'll be my master model railroader finished. I also have layouts that are exhibition layouts, as we call them in the UK, modular layouts, you'd call them in the US, in both HO and O scale 2 rail. And I also model O scale 2 rail British stuff as well as North American prototype with my father, who still lives in England and has a layout that would have been on the 2022 convention layout tours. Unfortunately, that won't be happening. So what are we here to do today? Well, there's a few learning objectives with any presentation that I try to do. I try to just set out where we're going and what we're aiming for here. And the main thing here is, what on earth are track charts and maps? A lot of people talk about Sanborn maps. We're not going to talk about Sanborn maps. I'm a modeler. If you're modeling anything post 1960s, you're probably going to struggle to find a Sanborn map that's pretty accurate for what you want. maybe you will, but the ones that seem to be available seem to stop around the transition era. So for the more modern eras, you're a bit stuck with other sources, and two of the best sources are track charts and maps, whether that be Google Maps or some hand-drawn maps, which I'll show you in a little second. We'll talk about why you should use them. We'll talk about where you can find them, and for your layout, there's some really good sources out there that are quite easy to find. But then I think that the majority of the clinic, to make life easier to understand why these are important, is we're going to use my layout or part of my layout as a working example. I was setting out to do the entire layout. When you see how big the layout design is, you'll realize that to go into the level of detail that we'll go into tonight or this evening, that just simply would not be possible in 45 minutes. But it does give us scope for some further clinics on layout design and track planning in the future, and we can talk about some of the elements that are there. So that's what we're here to do. Let's get right into it and have a look at some track charts. So this is a track chart, or a section of a track chart. It's from the Wisconsin Central Railroad in 2001. Its location is Slinger to Ackerville, Wisconsin. You can see, we'll have a look at a few things. It's 19 years out of date. That's the key thing, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But let's just look at a few things. So when reading a track chart, there's a few things on here that are of use to you as a modeler. One is the mileposts, the most important thing. Mileposts are columns on this track chart, but you'll always have the milepost indicated. So you can see here that we're looking at about 4 miles of railroad. And there's quite a lot going on in this 4 miles of railroad that we're using as an example here. We've got 2 railroads, and we've got a junction here, and we can see the track and different things, but we'll just go through what we've got. So we've got the grade. So below the milepost, we can see the grade. So we can see here that we're going up grade as we go down the miles. So just to kind of, I suppose, help you out with being able to see the bigger picture here, to the left is going towards Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and to the right we're going down towards Chicago. So the grade here is climbing up towards this point here between milepost 122 and 121, and then the grade starts to fall, and then here, interestingly, there's no grade, and then the grade falls away again. The railroad may notice that they may do something with that. We'll come on to that in a little second. So the track layout. So here we have the track layout at the bottom, and the track comes along from left to right and is intersected by the mileposts and relates to the grade. So what's quite interesting here is we can see we've got a run round or a passing loop with some spurs going off it above and below to industries or just to other trackage off the main line. We can see that there's another railroad here that's indicated by this different style of track, and it's the Wisconsin Southern Railroad indicated there, and you can see that track goes to Horicon. There's an interchange there as it goes through Slinger, and we can also see that there's some signaling. So we know that this section of railroad, there's a block signal there, box signals there, it's CTC and has box signals. We can also see that there's a passing loop there. So pretty interesting that the passing loop is actually on a grade now, and so are the spurs. Now generally when doing a layout and doing track planning, we always say don't put a grade where you're going to stop a train, and don't put a grade where we're going to switch and set out cars because your cars will roll away. Well, of course, in the model, unlike most models, unless it's Bernie Kapinski, most models don't have handbrakes, so that's why. Signals we mentioned. Speed limit is down the bottom. It's missing there. The speed limit on this section is actually 50 miles an hour. So you can see the speeds of your trains, and you can set speed limits realistically on your layout using this. You can also see where the grade crossings are. So you'll see which road it is that crosses. There's 2 grade crossings there. One there and one there. And then you have positions of different features, whatever those features may be, are all marked out on the on the track chart. Now, that bit that I mentioned before that was flat, very interesting. And the fact that the track chart was 19 years out of date. Well, since this track chart was produced, the CN worked with the CN, the Canadian National, bought the Wisconsin Central Railroad, and they decided that they wanted to have an interchange with the Wisconsin Southern, which is the local Class 3 short line. And so they built this interchange, which you can see the picture of here that I took in 2016. And they built a 10,000 feet long interchange and added an extra passing siding on their main line. It's not shown on the track chart, and that's why it's important that we've got to reference the date on the track chart with what's there today and the date and the era that we're modeling. What it also enables from the Wizards perspective, as you can see here, is it enables their local, one is coming this way from Milwaukee, and the train there that you can see coming towards us coming from Horicon, to actually turn and go back. Before that, they couldn't turn because they had nowhere to turn. So it was an important thing for both railroads. So that's a track chart. Track maps, what are they? Well, there's two types of track map that's available. You can have ones related to a track chart that are generally been drawn by somebody, hand drawn, and they'll again just show the detail like this of the railroad. So useful if you want to see things such as siding lengths, spot numbers, who owns what track, roads, where a road is, that's a bridge, not a grade crossing, because that's the bridge I'm standing on taking that picture. But it only gives us the detail of the track. So it's great for track planning, but not so great if we want to actually plan a layout, because of course with a layout we also need to look at the scenery. So what tools are available to us if we want to do that? Well, there's an open source project available called openrailwaymap.org. An Open Railway Map uses, I think it's Bing Maps as their base, and what they've done is they overlay that with the actual rails of where the track goes, and that's their interpretation of this section of track. There's the road there with the overpass, and you can see that we've got the photograph is taken from this bottom right hand corner of the map, looking towards the top left hand corner. And what's interesting though is that this doesn't show that that's a bridge. So you need kind of multiple sources to determine certainly if you live on this side of the Atlantic, you need multiple sources to determine what you're looking at. Also, it's difficult to see the terrain, so a photograph helps that you can see that actually these two railroads are actually on different levels. But if you had, of course, the track chart for the Wisconsin Southern and you had the track chart for the CN ex Wisconsin Central, you would be able to see the grades were different, and you'd be able to see that from the datum point that the two railroads were at a slightly different height. So two great sources, and that's what we're going to use as we go forward through the presentation. So why would we use a track chart or map? Well, it can help you recreate a realistic track plan. Nothing's more realistic than the real thing. However, as we'll come on to a little bit later, having the space for exactly the real thing as it is probably unrealistic as an expectation. It will help you understand the railroad you want to model more than looking at photographs. It's a primary source. These are generally made by the railroad, either for learning routes for the road crew, or for the track maintenance crew, and obviously for insurance and access and all kinds of other purposes. So it's in the railroad's best interest to make these as realistic as possible and to maintain them and update them. So it will help you understand what you want to model. It will also help you see over that fence without actually trespassing, and with a bit more detail than you can get from a Google satellite image. Knowing the locations of signals and turnouts is really important. It's very helpful if you want to add signal into your layout to actually, even if you're not modeling a specific prototype, it's good to look at track charts and track maps to see how they would lay out the signals, how the real railroad did the real thing. That understanding that blocks are not always necessarily the beginning and end of gaps of track between passing sidings. Sometimes blocks are just out there on the main line, as you saw there on the track chart we just looked at. There was a block signal right there in the middle of the main line. protecting the crossing, or to restrict the speed of the locomotives as they approach the junction between the CN and the Wisconsin Central and the Wisconsin Southern, as it was. It gives you lengths of prototype sidings, so you know the maximum length of the real railroad can run. It will tell you way more than Google Maps ever can, or Google Earth. Of course, you can see what the tracks now look like in a post-Sanborn era. And for me, it's absolutely vital to use these primary sources of information when you're wanting to model a prototype that is thousands and thousands of miles away. I wish it was closer, but unfortunately, it's a bit difficult to nip out to Lambeau Field and watch a game. So when you're in Orkney, so it's just the way of life. But the internet obviously helps, and having these primary sources available. I think Dan said earlier, even if you don't find what you're looking for on the internet, if you go to swap meets and train shows, usually you can see somebody there with stacks of railroad paperwork, and they may well have what you're looking for. If you know a railroader, ask them, and they may have some old copies. They may be unwilling to give you the latest version for security reasons, but they may have some old copies squirreled away from 20 years ago that might be useful for you. So just some sources before we get into actually doing some track planning. OpenRailwayMap.org is a great resource. It's a worldwide open source mapping project for railroads. I think it originated in Europe, hence the railway rather than the railroad. Not really a surprise. The railroads in kind of UK, Europe, Australia, and North America are probably the best documented on there. But if you want to look at how the railroads are in Mexico, or you want to look at how the railroads are in Thailand, then they're also on there. So there's a vast amount of information that you can see on there, and it's great. It's just a bit of a rabbit warren of a website once you get into it. You may be there for a few hours. Railroad historical societies, great sources of these kind of pieces of information, snippets, whether that's a car spot guide for a particularly large industry that you want to model, or whether that's actually a full track chart book. These books are quite big, so you may just want to be very specific about what you're looking for. So yeah, if you're not a member of, if you model a prototype railroad and you're not a member of the Railroad Historical Society already, you should probably think about joining it, just to get access to their archives and information that you can't find elsewhere. Railfan Depot.com. So Railfan Depot, sorry, I don't know saying Railfan and Depot. It's railfandepot.com is a great source. They have a number of track chart books for sale, either as a PDF download, which I would recommend, or for quite a lot of money, because you're talking, some of these things are in excess of 200 pages. They will print one off for you and give you a reproduction, but you're much better doing the download. That's where I got my track charts from. So go there, go look. If you're a class 1 modeler, you'll definitely find what you're looking for. If you are modeling a short line, you might have to go looking for whoever the parent railroad was before it became a short line, and you'll probably find the track chart that you're looking for. There's also lots of social media railfan groups out there, and big thanks to the guys at the Wisconsin Southern Railroad social media Facebook group. This is where I got most of my hand-drawn track maps from, and information about the Wisconsin Southern was from that group, and from other people that I know who are Wisconsinites, and been able to supply me with some great photographs while they're on the way to and from work. So I appreciate everything that everyone's done there. So that's the why we should use them. That's the where we can get them from. That's the how to read one very quickly, and also how to look at maps. So let's get into an actual worked example, and hopefully this will help kind of just cement a few of these things together for people. So I'm going to talk you through the process that I took to design my layout, or part of my layout. My layout's actually in 2 phases. So this was going to be the second phase, but due to the current situation and availability of materials, this has become the first phase of my layout. But it's fine because it was all planned at the same time. Andy, that wasn't a dig, but it was all planned at the same time, so it was okay. So let's get into it. For those not familiar with the Wisconsin Southern, this is the Wisconsin Southern system. It's split into two divisions, the Northern and the Southern Division. Most of this is ex-Milwaukee Road trackage. The Southern Division serves Madison, Wisconsin. Its main division yard is in Janesville, Wisconsin. There's a roundhouse there. You'll have heard on Dave Berman's clinic earlier the mention of Monroe, and the Monroe sub is served in the Southern Division from Janesville Yard. You've also got the Prairie sub that goes right out across the state. And in the Northern Division, I think is the most interesting. Not least because at Horican, you have a paint shop that is quite famous amongst rail fans because it repainted the Union Pacific Heritage Fleet, amongst others. So there's always something interesting at Horican going through the paint booth, or waiting to go through the paint booth, and sometimes that's more interesting looking at a patch out. So the two are separated though, and they're separated by they were separated by the Wisconsin Central. They're now separated by the CN. It's still the Waukesha subdivision, and for about 25 miles between Slinger and Grand Avenue in Waukesha, Wisconsin, the WISO has dual trackage rights with the CN as it is now to run over there, and they actually run two transfers, one each way per day, unless it's an extra. But this is a timetabled one each way per day train between Horican and Janesville to swap cars and locomotives between the northern and southern divisions. So there's quite a lot of traffic going on there. So what's interesting is phase one of my layout is actually modeling the Waukesha sub between Waukesha and Slinger. So, and actually thanks to Jordan Kramer's persuasive powers, we've decided to add a third deck to that part of the layout, and we'll be modeling all the way up to the outskirts of Fond du Lac, which is the big yard that used to be the hub of the Wisconsin Central Railroad. So quite a lot going on there. But the phase two was to just focus on the Northern Division. So the Northern Division on itself is quite big. It's smaller than the Southern Division, but it's still quite a lot of trackage. It's a significant amount of route miles, and I just do not have the space to model the whole of the Northern Division. However, as you'll see there, Horican's kind of in the middle. Ignore the Plymouth sub and the Sheboygan Falls spur that's recently reopened. This is let's just focus on Horican. Horican is the yard in the middle. It's kind of like a hub and a spoke model, so it's quite interesting. Horican sits at the end of the Milwaukee sub, which actually just conveniently has an interchange. At Ackerville, you just seen a picture of it earlier with the CN. So if I model Horican Yard, I have the opportunity to fan out 4 subdivisions, fan out from it, and could model any of them. So what I decided to do, having done some research, and we'll talk through the reasons why I chose this in just a second, I chose to model this section. So that's the Oshkosh and the Marketing sub, which go north out of Horican, and that gives us some good traffic. So when I look at what to model and how to understand this, after I've looked at a track chart and understood what the industries are, what the customers are, what's there beyond the fence, is to look at what trains run. Really important. So let's have a look at this. So these two subdivisions are actually quite busy. So we've got here, there are 3 locals. Locals on the Wisconsin Southern are denoted by the L. So you've got L597, L595, and L187. And what's interesting is that the longer of the 2 subdivisions is the Oshkosh sub. You can see that because we can see the milepost. So we can work out that the Oshkosh sub is about 10 miles longer than the Marketing sub. So what happens here is that the L595 that serves the Oshkosh sub doesn't do any work until it reaches Ripon. But the L597 would work any of the customers between Horican and Markesan, all the way between Brandon and Horican. So that's interesting. So that triggered me then to go and have a look at this in a bit more detail. And when I looked at the timetable and looked at the customers, there is not so many industries in the places between Brandon and Horican. But Brandon would be an important place to model because it's where the junction is. So based on that, and just looking at that before we get too far into that, we've got 2 yard jobs. If we modeled all the trains that we could have in a day, we have 2 yard jobs and 3 locals, and G591/2 is grain extra that runs. Ask Dave Berman about it, but it serves the huge grain elevators that are outside Ripon, and sometimes has run over power from the CN that can be just about any class 1 major power that runs to Ripon. So in any layout design, I've got to factor that in and consider that running to Ripon may require 6-axle locos, so got to think about the radiuses and stuff like that. So what are we going to model? Boom. Okay, so this is what we decided to model. So we'll model Horican because that's where the yard is. We'll model Brandon because that's where the junction is. We'll omit everything in between. Hey, it's my railroad, and I guarantee that most people in Orkney don't know that these places even exist. We'll model Ripon because it's got a lot going on there, a lot of industry. Pickett and Fisk are pretty much run-through towns. I apologise if anybody's from there, but they're pretty much now run-through towns. We'll omit those and we'll focus on Oshkosh. And went down the Markesan sub, Fairwater, not much there, but there's a mine at Utley, and at Markesan there's a few industries at the end of the line, including the transload facility. Lots of traffic. That's where most of the traffic originates from on these subdivisions. That's the towns where most of the traffic goes to. That's what we should model. Okay, so how do we know all that? Well, this because we look at a modern timetable. So the Wisconsin Southern uses track warrants to dispatch this northern division. There's no signals. There's not really a timetable. You don't have a timetable when you can leave a certain town, certain place. What you do have is you have the time that you clock on for work or start your shift, and the call time for the different jobs. So the Oshkosh local doesn't really have a call time. But when it's called, it's called. We know that at 6 a.m. Both of the locals get called to assemble their trains. So we know that the likelihood is that the Oshkosh local is going to leave in front of the Markesan local because it's got to do no work till it gets to Ripon, whereas the other one does need to do work. So it's kind of a timetable. But if you're modeling modern short line operations, this is what you're looking at from a timetable. You're not really going to get much more than this. So we talked about givens and drovers a few times in a few different presentations. Having set the scene of where we are, let's look at some of the constraints that we have and things like that. Briefly, givens are features and limitations that we must abide by. Drovers are nice to haves, things that I'd like to do. We may not get all of them. It doesn't matter if we do or we don't, but the givens are things that we can't be flexible on. They're things that we've got set in stone. Let's have a look at what we've got here for this layout before we get into the plan. So it's given it's going to be N scale. We talked about my things of buying other scales and being what the Aussies call a rubber bander. So just expanding on what your collection is in different scales. We know that the space is constrained. Sorry to people in North America, but we're going to use some metric measurements in some of these things. So it's 3.3 meters by 1.25 meters, and it's L-shaped. So the other leg of the L is 3 meters by 0.8 meters, which is pretty tight. It's given that it's going to be multi-deck because otherwise we won't fit everything in. It must connect to the CN Phase 1 layout. 10 car trains are the minimum that we wanted to be able to run. So that's our minimum passing side in. Minimum radius would be 11 inches because that's the manufacturer's recommended minimum radius, not because it's good practice, but that would be absolutely the tightest radius we want to do on the layout, and we actually do get forced to do that in the design. Um, Locomotives, mostly four-axle Jeep 38-2s for the Wisconsin Southern Northern Division. There are some SD40-2s that the Wizor has, but most of that's on transfer runs, so it's going away from Hurricane. It's not going down the subdivisions per se. That doesn't say it never happens, but we could get away with just running Jeep 38-2s. The nice to haves, I'd like to include the yard. We'd like to design and build the layout for remote operations. You'll see why that's an advantage. It needs to meet the requirements of the layout for others to obtain their NMRA Chief Dispatcher AP certificate, given that we're in Scotland and there's not many layouts in the UK anyway, certainly not in Scotland, that are big enough to do this. That's a really important feature because I have the space, so I shouldn't be selfish. It needs to be walking with a shelf design with no duck under because I'm really tall and I bang my head all the time and I don't want to do that. It needs to be achievable inside of 12 months because I want to get it up and running and done. I don't want to be having a plywood empire. It's got to have full block detection and remote turnouts, ideally. It's a nice to have, but if I can have it, that'll help with remote operations, and I won't have to run backwards and forwards and throw everybody's turnouts. And it would have been nice. One of my druthers was I really wanted to model all of the subdivisions to the north and west of Hurricane, but as I've already given that away, that's not something that we can do. So, space. Here is my custom built train room. Very, very lucky to do this. We were fortunate enough to design and build our own house, which completed 3 days before the United Kingdom went into lockdown, which is convenient for me, but not so convenient as it could have been if we were able to actually have a housewarming party. But this is the design here in lots of multicolored areas of phase 1. This is the layout we've got to connect into, so it takes up the majority of the room. This is phase 2, and it's to enable me to have model the Wizor and have some switching. So this is in a corner. It nicely fills that corner. It's not a big enough space for me to put a breakout room or a place for a crew lounge. It's just not big enough, and ultimately it's Orkney, and why not just go to the pub? So we don't need a crew lounge in the same space. We have other spaces in the house and in the village where we can have a suitable crew lounge. So the area is actually located behind the staircase. The staircase is in the bit. That's what makes it an L shape. It's in the bit of the L that's cut, a bit of the space that's cut off to make the L. It's a staircase, so we can't use that space. We can't go through that wall because it's a restricted head height. It's restricted height space, but it is a purpose-built room. It's finished with a stone floor, and the walls are finished, so we can't go into the walls, so they can't be damaged. And you'll see how I overcame that in some photographs at the end of my presentation. There's a window here in grey that needs to be covered by the layout. So that's okay. We can cover the window. That's fine. Unlike the CN section of the layout, this is not going to be modular. The CN section's all modular, so it can come out of the room. This can be fixed. I've got planning permission from the boss that this can be fixed, and it must interchange with the CN at a deck height of 145 centimeters from the floor, as the floor is a datum because it's just a new build house. It's nice and level. So let's look at the entire scheme, even though we're only looking and focusing on a part of this scheme for this demonstration. Normally, when you're looking at doing a track plan, most people look at a track plan from above, as a looking at a table laid out in front of you, and that's fine until you approach a multi-deck layout. Because when you've got a multi-deck layout, you need to look at it as if you're standing there and looking at the scenes. Okay, and that's because if you put areas of lots of activity one above the other, you're going to make your layout become congested because everybody's standing in the same place with a train on each even though the train's on each different deck, and in theory, as far as the dispatch is concerned, they've all got green signals. If they've all got work to do at the same time, all on top of each other stacked, then it's going to have exactly the same effect as a choked yard would, and it's going to bring the entire layout to a standstill. So this is looking at the layout as if you were standing in the aisle looking at what you can see. Okay, don't worry about the CN so much, but this is what we did for the Wisconsin Southern. So there's Hurricane Yard, which is there's the Milwaukee sub represented by a removable section to connect the two layouts. We go through Brandon, Wisconsin, Helix, up, and Marcusson will be on deck 4. So that's Marcusson sub on deck 4. Coming down to deck 2, we'll model Ripon. Coming down to deck 1, sorry, we'll model Oshkosh. And um, that Oshkosh subdivision is what we're going to use as our track planning example in just a second. So going back to track map, this is Oshkosh in detail from the open railway map system, and we can see and split this into 5 distinct areas of interest. And the space, just to give you an idea of scale for this, between this road here at the end, which is where the track end is, which is on South Washburn Street, or Allerton Drive. I'm not quite sure where it becomes where road becomes which. I think it's Allerton Drive. And the Wisconsin Highway 91 is about 3 miles. So it's about 3 miles in total. And we have the Watco port at the beginning of town. We then have Lico Steel. We then have Lapham Hickey Steel Corp and Wow Logistics. We have Bemis, and we have Oshkosh Trucks, who have an end loading ramp at the end of the line. So looking at the way that looks right now, we can't model that exactly as it is because of the fact that there's lots of spurs coming off at 90 degrees, and that's going to be in our aisle, and our aisle width is already constrained. So even though it's N scale as well, to model that to scale would be 96 feet long, and we have not got 96 feet, as you've just seen in that space. So what are we going to do? We're going to have to compromise. To help us compromise, we need to look at what customers do we have, so we can understand where the traffic is, so we can remove the industry based on the fact that there's no traffic there, because there's not much point. So let's have a look at that. So here is a list of all of the customers in Oshkosh served by the Wisconsin Southern. Here's the inbound cars that they receive. Here's the outbound cars. No surprise, the transload port, the yard, is the busiest pace on the layout in terms of traffic and traffic types of cars. But we can see here that we've got 2 steel companies. We've got Lapham Hickey Steel and we've got Lico Steel. And there's a trick here. They take the same type of cars. They're basically moving gondolas, flat cars, bulkhead flats with steel plate or steel coil. And so if we eliminate one of them, then we might reduce the traffic, but we don't necessarily reduce the interest on the layout. So that's what we've done. We have taken out one of the steel places. So 5 bits of interest. We'll call those layout design elements, and we'll just quickly go through and look at that. So the transload facility from the air looks like this. This is a Google Maps image that you're looking at. If we overlay the track map onto that, it gives us a lot more detail. It's very difficult to pick up where the tracks actually are there. This is where track map comes in. That's the track map overlaid. And we can see we've got siding lengths. We can see where the sidings actually are. We can see the transloads actually down the bottom here and stuff like that. There's a photograph of the scene. Looking from here, where the grade crossing is, looking into the port itself, you can see there's a lot of Oshkosh trucks, vehicles ready to be exported. There's the ethanol plant. There's the grain. So so let's have a look at that on the layout. There's that nice big picture. Big thanks to Andy Dorsch who sent me that picture. There's the track map just for reference. Here's it now laid out as a design. So we've incorporated 3 roads to give us a free track yard. We've incorporated the grain and the ethanol, but we've had to relocate some of the spurs just to give it a nice aisle width. Now, this scene here that you're seeing is in about 5 feet. 6 feet, maybe up to the very end here. It's a depth of 6 inches here, and it's a foot deep there. So it's quite restricted in space, but as it's N scale, we can get away with it. You're viewing from the top, looking down. So what I've had to do here is these ethanol sidings are quite long, so these just now go off into the aisle, and you can represent an industry by terminating the end of the sidings in the aisle without actually modeling them, and just by spotting some cars there, it can make it feel that it's actually a lot longer than it is. You can do the same thing into the back scene and just pop a mirror there, and it'll look right. So the next area that we've got is Wow Logistics. Wow Logistics will just pop up the track map, so we can see Wow Logistics is on the right there, and going off to the left would be the spur to Lapham Hickey Steel Corp, and if you were going straight on, you would be going towards the end of the line, so you're heading up towards the Oshkosh Trucks loading ramp. What I did here is I've incorporated these into the design by using the corners to allow for the rather than running parallel to the tracks, I've used the corners. So while logistics actually does go away from the roadbed, and from if you were standing at that loading dock, you can't see the main line because of these trees. So I've just used the corners to put in these industries. I've added back in Lico Steel, which is actually behind us where we're looking at this photograph. So we have a steel industry, but I've added Oakwood Road, which you can see on this map. So we do still have a grade crossing. That's where this photograph's taken. So when you take a photograph of Wow Logistics on the layout, it should pretty much mirror this and enable us to make that scene. So big tip here is that just modeling one steel industry just reduces the traffic, but we still have all the car types if we've got more than one industry in the town. Bemis, this is the Bemis plant. You can see the covered hoppers just there. How does this look on the track map? Well, actually, oh dear, it's 90 degrees off from the layout. This isn't going to end very well. If we were in the aisle here, if we were on the layout here, we would be in the aisle standing somewhere up where my cursor is. So that would actually be under the stairs. Not very good for operating. So what are we going to do about that? Well, if we just bend it 90 degrees, back, so it's parallel to the tracks, omit the fact that the Universal Street exists, just forget Universal Street for a moment, we can then fit in that very large industry in a very small space. That's actually only 7 inches deep, the aisle, that deck, that shelf is only 7 inches deep, so that scene will be quite flat. We'll be using some digital photographs to help with the scenery on that scene, but we can still work it. We've got the main there, and effectively we've created a nice little Inglenook switching puzzle, which is very realistic of exactly what's there, which is nice. So there we go. It rotated at 90 degrees, and half relief in the buildings has managed to get us to fit in that extra scene. So Oshkosh Trucks, love Oshkosh Trucks. So many different things you can do here. So many different models. They also retrieve trucks back for maintenance as well as as well as shipping. So you don't necessarily have to pull those delicate models off their flat cars once you've done them. There's not really a need for a track map here. Basically, at the very end of the line, there's a ramp, and it's served off this street. So what we've done here is we've got a road here, a road here, and the line goes right to the end, and there'll be an end loading ramp. And basically, a tip from used in switching layouts is that having an industry on a switching lead is actually prototypical. Some people don't like it because it makes operations annoying if you have to respot cars or you have to take a smaller cut of cars, because that's actually the switching lead to switch BMIS. So you're going to have to use this curved section of track to switch BMIS, but it just means you've got to be more prototypical and take a shorter cut of cars. That's exactly what it's like in the real thing. Just taking a quick look at the entire layout, the entire plan for this deck, we can see all the different design elements. There's the port, there's logistics and steel, there's BMIS, and there's Oshkosh Trucks. So nice, all fits in a nice little area. You definitely have space to model a prototype layout, no matter how little amount of space that you've got. And there's our Helix, and I've built the Helix tonight while I've been working on NMRX, so we'll look at the Helix in the roundtable. So just quickly looking at operations, there's 9 locations to spot cars. There's space for 29 car spots, and there's a yard capacity for 29 car spots. So nowhere should get congested on the layout, but equally we don't want to move every car every time, but we do need to be able to work that yard. There's 1 or 2 jobs just in this one deck. And as you can see, fitting 4 people into there is going to be tight, and there's other decks on top. Hence why remote operations is really important. All of the engineers and all the engineers, yard master, etc. on my layout will all be remote, including the dispatcher and the traffic manager. The only person that will be in here will be 2 conductors to do the uncoupling cars for different local trains. The total space there on that deck is only 13.5 square feet, but there's a track, it absorbs 50 feet of track. So we started building the layout on Saturday. This was how far we got at lunchtime, 12 o'clock. We put in this effectively mimicking stud walling, so we're not damaging the wall fabric of the house. 4 o'clock, we had the deck down. This support that's here on the left is simply because there will be the double helix going in here to go between deck 4 to deck 3, deck 3 to deck 2. This is the place here where the helix will go. So that was 4 o'clock. 8 o'clock on Saturday, we'd fitted the track and we're starting to wire up. We were running the bus wires and stuff like that. Monday, I got a couple of hours between clinics to wire it up. Got the trains running on Tuesday. This morning at 11:30, the helix arrived. That was at 12 o'clock. We had a helix. Well, it wasn't 12 o'clock. I was still working then. It would have been 1 o'clock. We had half a deck of a helix in. It's all CNC cut. And yeah, I think we're on 45 minutes. So that is the end of the presentation. Sorry, I just had to flick through there at the end, Bruce. If anyone's interested in seeing the other decks, I posted them in the Animary Facebook group, so you should be able to see them. I'll stop sharing for you, Bruce.
I'll take myself on. Well done. That's a fascinating presentation. We have a few questions. Somebody commented when you showed your track diagram, the very first one, there's that upper curved line, and he says that was the curvature of the tracks.
Which track? Which
the very first one you talked to has got that curvy line on the top.
The track. Wait, the track chart or the track plan?
Your track chart.
Oh, the track chart. The grade.
Above that, right at the top, there's a line that's got some dips in it, curved dips in it.
That's showing you the road relative the actual road itself. If there's any ground feature that's relative to the track. So
it's that not curvature.
So it's not curvature as far as I know. Okay. But it could be. It could be the curvature.
Yeah.
I'd need to check. I'd need to check what exactly which exact line it is. But if you go whenever you look at a track chart, each railroad does their track chart slightly differently. And at the very beginning of the track chart, there'll be an index that will help you and show you how to read it, because they're all slightly different.
Yeah, this is the one right across the top. It comes along. It's got a dip, and then it straightens up. And then there's another dip.
Yeah. My understanding is that's the curvature, and you've got it'll tell you how tight the. I don't know what the unit measure is actually on this track chart, but should show you how tight the curve is.
Okay.
Because if you look there in the picture that was on that, I'm looking at the slides and you're not. But in the picture that I had on next to it, you can see there's a curve, and it kind of relates to the curve that's on the actual chart. So it does show you the curve, and it shows you the direction of the curve, whether the curve is going that way or the curve is going that
way. Question 2: when Gordy says he and Jordan live thousands of miles away from each other. Are they planning to virtually connect 2 sections of the layout together from either side of the Atlantic, or just one layout but with remote control, or both, and be new modules virtually connected, or something completely different?
So something completely different. So it's my layout, but me and Jordan talk quite a lot, and we generally talk at the weekends, and most of the time we've got our track planning software up, and he'll talk and give me ideas and advice, and just it's difficult when you're a remote modeler. It's good to have the internet to throw ideas off your friends, especially in this circumstance as well. So that's more us just spitballing and throwing ideas off each other.
Somebody's asked, are you using any rail for your design?
Yeah, I use AnyRail, and I recommend everyone giving it a go. You're limited to 50 pieces on the free version, but really for the price of it, you should really support the project and get yourself a license.
And is
It's
that
great.
more designed for set track, for lack of better words,
No, it's got
sectional track, or you can put
sectional
flex?
track. No, you can do flex. So my
Okay.
layout track plan you saw there was actually planned with Kato Unitrack. It was originally planned with. It's been planned in fast tracks, but it's difficult for me to get the material in the UK. And it was planned with Pico. It's difficult at the moment to get Pico, so it got replanned with Kato. And that's the great thing about any rail is you can just swap out the track really easily. You can do flex, you can do hand laid stuff, and you can do sectional track.
Okay. So you mentioned stone floor. I mean, cobblestones or gravel or concrete?
It's ceramic tiles, but they're quite thick.
Ceramic tile. Okay. Somebody comments, not sure what Bemis makes today, but at one time they made seats and lids for commodes.
Yeah, they make basically any kind of plastic. So,
Yeah.
yeah, they're bottles and plastic packaging and materials like that.
Okay. Uh,
I've got a
how do you
question
get the
for you.
time to do everything you do with a young family as well?
Uh, it's a challenge. I have a very understanding partner who helps quite a lot at the moment to enable me to do these things at times when Annabelle's awake. But most of the time, after Annabelle, my daughter goes to bed, then I usually get 2 or 3 hours in an evening to get on with stuff, and it's just multitask. You find the time. If you do it, you'll do it. But there's, as I showed on one of the roundtables, one of my lockdown projects has been sat there since March, and it's got 4 walls on it. So not everything progresses at the same pace.
Right. You said you had a question, Brad. Go ahead.
I've got a question for you, Gordy. Now,
Yeah.
that's a fair bit of in-depth research there. How long
Mhm.
did it take you to put all that together to come up with that track plan? How long have you been researching in total for that?
On and off about 3 years. The Wisconsin Southern bit was a decision that I made back in February. So I know about the Wisconsin Southern because I model it in HO, but to actually go into that level was just put together in probably about 2.5 months. But I had the great thing is because I asked on the forums, I had a great guy called Sal who provided me with a spreadsheet that gave me all the roster for the Wizard, gave me all the train IDs, gave me all the customers, all the different freight cars that they receive, gave me all the trains. He gave me his copies of the track maps. So all I needed to do was go and fill in all the gaps and actually turn it into a track plan. So it's not all of my own research, but that's the great thing about the internet is people are willing to share. So
That's certainly true. Well, Gordy, thanks very much. A very interesting presentation. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. And that brings us to the end of the afternoon drive here on Gateway X for Wednesday, July the 15th. Getting ready to move into the round table. And after that, a couple more clinics tonight. I will be back tonight presenting a clinic at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And I'll be back in the host seat tomorrow afternoon for the afternoon drive on July 16th. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope you've had a good time, and we'll see you later.